there, everybody. My name is Jody Hand. I go by Mrs. Hand Painted on Instagram. Today I'm going to do a watercolor tutorial on a kitchen utensil art piece. This would be a great piece to hang up in your kitchen or your dining room using watercolors. And the colors I'm going to use today are Magella Mission Gold watercolor paints, the first color is Ivory Black, and I'll use that for the lettering. This is Raw Umber. I'm going to use that for the rolling pin. This is Peacock Blue. Some alternatives would be phthalo blue, green shade, or phthalo turquoise. And this is quinacridone permanent rose. You could also use Daniel Smith permanent rose. Magella Mission Gold permanent yellow light. And I do have some alternatives in Daniel Smith listed on my blog if you're interested in some alternatives to match. I also used a watercolor pencil to sketch my design, and I have a PDF of that available on my blog linked as well if you want to use my drawing to trace. So I've sketched that out in watercolor pencil. It's kind of hard to see on here, but did it very lightly so that it doesn't show through. Okay, so the first step I'm going to do is just to paint the flowers on the utensils, and I very just lightly sketched out where those are going to be on the utensils, and I'm just going to do those on the two outside ones, which is the spatula and the spoon. So I want to make kind of a peachy orange color, and I'm mixing the rose and the yellow together to kind of give me an orange color. And this is personal preference. If you don't want to use these colors, you are free to make it your own and match your decor. I'm just going to do a basic flower shape. I've made 5 petals. I like to do a little line in the beginning so that I know where my petals are going to be. So I'm doing the largest flower around the spoon here. And I'm going to do 2 orange flowers, one on the spoon and one on the spatula. Making my 5 points, my petals. And you can customize this with whatever type of flower that you feel comfortable painting. I'm just doing some very simple, loose flowers. I don't want this to be lifelike. This is just a whimsical piece of art, and so they can just be kind of loose looking, and it doesn't need to be super precise. So I'm leaving an opening in the middle of the flower. The next one I'm doing is in rose, and I'm just kind of making a squiggly motion in a circle, leaving an open for the center of the flower. Like I said, we're just doing a very loose style. This doesn't need to be a flower in real life. It's just a cutesy little piece of art. I don't want to do quite bright yellow, so I'm just mixing a tiny bit of my orange in there to darken it up a little bit. And I'm doing a yellow flower the same way I just did the pink, just doing kind of a blobby circle with the center open. Do another yellow one on this side. And feel free to make it however you want. I'm taking my peacock blue and I'm just making some little small, we'll say kind of a blobby shape. So that is it for the flowers. We'll put the centers in after this dries so that it doesn't bleed. I'm going to mix up my own green for the leaves. So I'll take my permanent yellow light and my peacock blue to make a green. And if you prefer to use a pre-mixed green like Hooker's green or sap green, that is an option. I was trying to limit my number of colors I used for this piece. So I am mixing it together. So for the leaves, I'm going to do a branch of leaves for each one of these. Do a thin line and some small leaves. And there are plenty of tutorials out there if you need help learning how to make leaves with a round brush. Here I'm just going to stick a few extra leaves sticking out from the edges of the flowers, very small, coming out of the spaces between the flowers. And if you'll notice, I'm kind of pausing in between each one, just taking a look at it and seeing where I feel there is an empty space that needs to be filled. And then I'm putting a leaf in that area. Here I'm going to do another stem of leaves coming out. And I'll do a small one, not quite as long, just a few leaves coming out of that side just to even it out. Again, pausing to take a look at it and see where there's some empty spaces are that you might want to put a leaf. Remember, we're doing this in a very loose style. We don't need it to be super lifelike. This is just a whimsical piece of art. And it's your art, so however your preference is, you can customize it to your tastes. All right, so I'm going to let those flowers dry for a little bit before I go in and paint the surrounding utensils. I don't want them to bleed into that. It's the ivory black we're also going to use for the whisk here. So I'm going to water that down quite a bit to give it a gray color, and I'm going to paint in the whisk. Using my larger round brush, I'm going to do the handle of the whisk, and then we'll switch to our size 1 for the wired part of the whisk on the top portion. And one thing that I wish I had done on this was possibly wetting the area first so that I could eliminate getting any streaks. This might be something you want to try, is wetting the area first and then putting your pigment in so that you can avoid getting some of those harsh lines. I did have to do a bit of blending here because I had to keep reloading my brush. So if I paint this one again, I will definitely do a wet and wet for this. So switching to my size 1, I'm going to do the rounded portion of the whisk. You want to keep reloading your brush because a small brush doesn't hold as much water and pigment. So you may have to keep reloading your brush as you go so you don't get a feathery or dry brush. And I'm just following along the design that I drew previously. What's nice about using a watercolor pencil is that it will just blend in. I used a gray watercolor pencil for this, so if I don't quite get on top of my drawing, it blends in very nicely with water. Of course, if you used a regular pencil for a drawing, you can go back after everything is dry and erase any extra pencil lines that are outside of your design. Just going to go back and touch up my handle on my whisk and blend a little bit more where it's a bit streaky or it bled. I don't want to have any pools of water that might end up in a bloom, which is that very feathery looking area where water pooled up on your paper when it dried. So the next utensil I'm going to work on is the rolling pin. So I'm going to use my raw umber. And again, this is where I wish that I had wetted the area first because it is quite a large area to do. And excuse me for that noise in the background. I'm not sure if you picked that up. My cat was terrorizing the house a bit. So here I'm going to use my practice sheet to I have off to the side just to make sure that I've got the right shade that I wanted. I'm adding water to lighten that color. And again, like I said, adding water to that area first to make sure that you don't get any streaks would have been a good idea. Or using a bigger brush to cover a wider area, since this is a large rectangular area on the paper. And just keep adding water to my brush to blend it. And you'll want to just blend that out, make sure you don't have any harsh lines or puddled water areas. So to do the handles of the rolling pin, I'm using the peacock blue, and again, I'm adding a lot of water to that to make a lighter, more pastel shade of the blue. And I'll use my practice sheet to make sure that I've got the right shade that I desire. I just use a scrap piece of watercolor paper. Add some eraser shavings on the page to rub off there. So doing the handles of my rolling pin next, and if your brown is not quite dry yet, you'll want to leave just a very, very thin line there so that you don't bleed into the brown. Of course, you can wait to dry that or use a heat tool or hair dryer to dry that more quickly if you're worried about that bleeding in. I'm just leaving a very thin line between the two there so that I don't bleed. And we're going to use that same shade of blue for the spatula handle and the spoon. And my flowers should be dry at this point, and I can go around them. Again, leaving just a very small gap in between if you're worried about any bleeding if it is still wet a little bit. There is a tiny bit of the handle showing through right above the flowers as well, so I want to make sure I fill that in. And doing the same for the spoon. You notice there I was a little bit darker, so I can wet my brush and blend that color out as well. And very carefully going around the edges of the flowers. And sometimes when we're doing a large area like this, it is easy for water to get pooled together. So you will want to make sure that you spread that out. Don't let any water pool up on your paper, as that will give you a bloom effect. Although some people like that as a feature of watercolor. That's an interesting texture sometimes. And just finishing the handle here and going around the flowers. And the last part of the utensils that I need to finish is the top of the spatula. And usually those are white, but I'm going to just make it a very, very light shade of gray. So I'm watering down my ivory black, the same I did with the whisk, and I'm going to do the top of the spatula with this. I'm just going to turn my paper around to make it a little easier to do that section. Just blending that out as well. All right, so the next part that I'm going to do is the lettering. I'm going to do just a very dark shade of the peacock blue. I'm not going to add much water to this. I want this to be a nice dark turquoise color. And one trick that I have done with lettering, I have trouble freehand lettering, especially with a paintbrush, because it doesn't flow like a marker does. And you certainly can use some brush letter markers if you are comfortable with lettering. I used a light pad to trace lettering. I printed off from my computer in a font that I liked, and I traced that with my watercolor pencil from my light pad. And then I can fill those letters in with my paintbrush. This is something really helpful when you're learning how to do brush lettering. And I do find lettering to be difficult with a paintbrush and watercolor because you do have to keep loading your brush, especially a small one like this. I'm using the size 1 round brush for this. Of course, if you used a marker and you're comfortable with lettering, you can freehand that. I find this helpful for me, especially for spacing, to make sure that I can fit my whole phrase on the bottom of the paper and I don't run out of space or my letters are not squished together. Also helps with uniformity and letter size. So I'm just going to fill those letters in. And the phrase that I chose for this was "bake it till you make it." Other phrases that you could possibly use: "we bless this kitchen," or any other phrases that you feel would fit with your decor. Right, so just finishing up the last of the lettering there. And now it's time for the final details. We'll need to paint the centers of our flowers and do any touch-ups that you feel that your painting needs at this point. My camera battery did die on this and I had to switch batteries, so there's a tiny bit of a gap of me painting the flowers here, so I apologize for that. I mixed together the peacock blue and the rose to make a deep purple shade for my centers, and I'm just making small dots in the middle of the flowers that I left the centers open on. just do that on each of the flowers, and then I added a few dots to the blue ones as well, just to add a little bit of detail to those. And like I said, you'll want to make sure that your flowers were completely dry at this point so that you don't bleed that purple into the colors. At this point, they were the last thing I did, and they were very dry. And that is a finished painting. I want to thank you for watching my tutorial. I would love your feedback, and please subscribe to my channel. I'll be adding lots more tutorials in the future and process videos of my painting. Have a great day!